Now, before I hand over to Geraldine, who's going to talk more about today's event, I want to introduce her. She doesn't really need an introduction because everybody knows Geraldine. Geraldine Montgomerie is the project officer for LAWN, the Leeds Arts, Health and Wellbeing Network. She has been in post for just over a year and has done some great work in that time. She's a practicing artist and has a background in the health sector. And I will let her say more about LAWN and about the specific work from Beyond Measure that we are talking about today, which is the bit that I've omitted from my introduction. So over to you, Geraldine. I look forward to seeing you all at the end, and thanks for being here. Looking forward to a good discussion.
Thanks everybody, and thank you Erica for such a kind introduction. I've been trying to keep links going in the chat, so if we talk about anything and you feel you'd just like a little bit more information, let me know and I'll try and keep updating those. Just to let you know, the Leeds Arts Health and Wellbeing Network is one of many networks across the UK looking at arts and health. Most recently, Scotland had one set up earlier this year, and our network was established last year in 2019. The goal is to look at how arts and creativity can support Leeds and the wider region to be healthy and help people who are the most disadvantaged to improve their health the fastest. And we do that by looking at new ways to collaborate between arts, culture, research and academia, and health and care. And we do that by connecting different organisations, by championing and celebrating what's going well, and supporting organisations and individuals to achieve as much as possible in terms of health outcomes and engagement in the arts. And we're optimistic that through the ongoing collaboration that we're going to make a real difference to our communities. So that's the kind of the bottom line of Leeds Arts Health and Wellbeing Network. We're somewhat disadvantaged because we try and do quite a lot of in real life events by the ongoing lockdown, but we're looking at sort of developing quite a good program of upcoming events. So it'd be great for people to keep following us on Twitter and signing up to our newsletter to stay engaged with our activities, which focus on kind of key developments in research, new funding, and events around arts and health, both locally, regionally, nationally and internationally. One of the things that I wanted to take time to talk about was just to introduce the micro commissions that led to this event. We put out a call for artists to respond to the brief of Beyond Measure, which had a focus on research and evidence in arts, culture, health and wellbeing. And we had such a wonderful range of submissions that were really sensitive to themes of research ownership and the mental health of creative practitioners, of people working in the fields of health and care, and also to themes around ethics and equity. We had a panel that represented key figures in health and the arts in Leeds. Those included Dorothy Monacoso from Leeds Beckett University, Dr. Mo Satter, who is very passionate about health inequalities and the well-being of communities and health and care professionals, Ruth Pitt, who's the chair of Leeds 2023, and one of our LAWN governance members, Fee, who's a practicing artist and reporter, and she's one of the art doctors, or maybe she's a junior doctor. What came out of that independent panel was that we'd originally planned to commission 6 artists, but we ended up commissioning 10. Some of them are here today, including Becky Cherryman in our audience, and 3 artists are going to speak on their practice, about their approach, why they were interested in the commission, and what are the artistic outputs that they've created. And that's Sarah Fraser, Garry Barker and Nia B. I'm going to put a link to the exhibition that we curated online from the work that all the artists did, and if you haven't had time to look at it, I really recommend that you do. But I'm ready now to hand over to Sarah Fraser so that she can tell us more about her work.
Thank you, Geraldine, and thank you for inviting me to speak today, and for the amazing opportunity to produce new work for this conference. Share my screen. I'm sorry. I have this all practiced. Sorry. I'm getting all the technical problems out the way. There we go. Starting with something. It started with something small. We all have different ways of working. The context of this commission was a 6-week project in 2019 with Changes Health and Wellbeing, a user-led organisation which supports people in mental distress in Stoke-on-Trent. And it was part of the British Ceramics Biennial's Clay Works, year-round Clay Works project, which is a health and wellbeing focus. Over the 6 weeks, we explored in an open-ended way. We explored clay, and it was a chance to provide opportunities for the participants to find their own connections with clay and their mental health journeys. We explored space and different ways of making with clay, and then the participants expressed what they wanted to do, and this informed the plan of the whole course. One of the things that came out was that people wanted to make molds and multiples of objects, and so they brought in objects of significance to them, and then also made their own small models. It was quite fun trying to make molds in what was basically a conference room. But it got messy and fun. And the whole process was filmed by Blythe Taylor, who is a member of Changes. And the film, I recommend watching it, really captures the sort of the atmosphere of us all working together. It was a new way of working for me, sort of openly exploring something with other people. And there was a strong focus on the sensory experience of working with clay. And another element was writing about how people, what people were sensing as they were working with the clay, and just any observations that they noted. That's cold, that's quite warm. It's different feeling. Fragile, smooth pastry, agate vases. The pieces that everyone made were arranged in the China Hall in Spode, in Stoke-on-Trent. And this was an opportunity to come together and share what everyone had done. And so for this commission, I used the words that everyone had written, Blythe's film, and a selection of the molds that were made by participants, as well as some of the molds I brought in during the sessions, and a few of my own demonstration molds. In this experience, this sort of spirit of experimentation that the whole project involved was something that informed my process. And then also with this idea of measuring and being kind of trying to be clear in measuring but then also following something more intuitively. I selected different clay bodies from porcelain, brick clay, and added different things to the body. So in this picture, I'm adding cobalt oxide, which changes the colour and also makes the clay flux. But it was quite free and open, the choices that I made, and that was informed by the spirit of the participants. And as I was going along, I was writing notes, not only about the quantities and the things that I was measuring out and bringing together, but also just anything that popped up in my mind, and the sensory experience of the qualities of the material. The repetitive process of pressing really resonated with the sorry, I'm so nervous. Yeah, it was a really calming activity, and we could really kind of just get into the process. The difference between pressing and pinching, I could have done that all day. Bubble of calmness, I don't get that very often. So I did 10 different types of mixtures of clay, and there was an element of unexpected, of the unexpected. I wasn't sure what was going to happen when they were fired. I had some idea for some of the things, but this was something that I embraced as a freedom to explore. And things went wrong, so I made these protective bats to place the work on and protect the kiln shells. And as you can see, this is the cobalt. It's left sort of shadows on the bats. There was a complete meltdown of one of the bodies of clay, and basically turned into a glaze on the kiln shells, taking a few pieces with it. So following the same process, I arranged the pieces in the China Hall, and the wonderful photographer Jenny Harper came in to document the process of installing the work and the work itself. And this was also in parts a collaborative process. From the sort of repetitive process of really getting into making the multiples, it led me to sort of think about, it was really immersive, and I got this idea that it needed another step, which integrated my practice, which often includes throwing vases and decorating them with various slips, which are liquid clay, and then adding the sprigs onto the mold, onto the vases. And so this represented a new direction for me of exploring and combining the process that I use with working with others into making a different work, a new work. And it's a process of creative conversation, where there's a doing and experiencing and making together, where I share my input in that process, and something is produced from that. And this may be the individual pieces, the molds, the words, and then that is translated in some way to produce something new, and then sharing the results of that provocation. And just sort of thinking about the ways that this sort of happened over the course of the project, with changes, but also how that can happen and how you can plan for it to happen from the outset of a project. So I was left with some questions about replication and about whether it was just copying, repeating, pieces that were made from the molds. But I think it was a way of really immersing myself in the reflection. And the pieces that I made, the two vases and the pressings, wouldn't have come about without this relationship between myself, the community, and the material process. But equally, they are my individual and very personal responses to us working together. It's been such a wonderful way of reflecting through making, rather than the other ways that one typically reflects on this type of project. And it's really consolidated my thoughts on ways of working in conversation with others. With clay, the end is a new beginning. The process is more important than the product. It's like the journey is more important than the destination.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah, for your presentation. And I don't think you need to worry about the anxiety. It was really fascinating, and I think we all feel a bit uncomfortable in the online environment. But the feedback from our audience so far is extremely positive. Particularly pick out Kathy Brennan's point that there's something really fascinating about the process of creation without knowing what the end product will be, and that kind of exploration that's involved. And also from Alison McIntyre about the process, because that's something that as an audience we sometimes don't get to hear the full story on, the actual crafting of work, even if there isn't necessarily an end product. And also particularly the quotes that you picked out that describe the sensory aspects. So thank you so much, and the photos were absolutely wonderful. And
really wonderful opportunity, because the BCB sort of supported the commission with the photography. So yeah.
So yeah, thank you so much. So at this point, we're able to move on now to our second artist. And now, because we ran a little bit behind with Sarah, right on time. So I'd like to welcome Garry Barker to speak about his work and process and his interest in the Beyond Measure Commission.
Let me just check whether I get this sharing right.
Hey, looks great.
Does that look okay? I can't, I've only got half of it on here. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you great, Garry. And I don't know if we can move on to a slideshow, but I can see the whole slide. You
can see the whole slide, okay. I shall hope then to see if I can work to it. It's just on my screen, it's not a full screen for some unknown reason. Okay, so I've broken it down into those questions, such as why I applied in the first place. The themes of art and health really overlapped with what I was doing already. I had been working with people that had a series of things that you could say they felt were wrong with them, whether it was an illness or whether it was something that they felt they lacked. There was a need almost to externalize what it was that they were feeling. And I'd gone back to a very old form of art, which was working with votives. Interesting with Sarah, she's been working a lot with ceramics, and I was also working a lot with ceramics. I would sit with someone and basically say, well, what is it that you're feeling here? Sometimes they would be talking about a mental feeling, sometimes a physical feeling. And I would build something and they would say, it's not like that. So I change it, and they come back and go, it's more like this. Oh, more. So gradually I would make these objects, which had externalized something that somebody had kept inside them. Most people tended to then, at the end of that process, really feel that they felt better. But what I started to do was to go back and look at what happened to the original votives. And with the original votives, there was always a ritual involved. There was always a ritual that would involve some other power. And in those days, obviously, it was some form of god or deity. But obviously, I'm not religious. I didn't want to be seen as a religious figure, but I realized there was a certain sort of need for a ritual. So one of the things that started to do was to say to people, well, what do you want to do with this object? Some I gave back and they smashed them. Some they put them on their wall or their mantelpiece. Others they just gave back to me. But gradually what I was also becoming aware of was because of my age, I'm in my 70s now, what I was finding was that in particular older people were wanting to talk to me because they could sense that I had a certain sort of empathy. Whether or not that was right or not is another matter, but it was very interesting that I was having to talk a lot more to older people, and of course they've got more ailments, they've got more worries about things. So I use stories. For a long time I've worked in communities with art, and one of the things I always used to do was go into that community and draw, walk in the streets and just be there drawing. And what would happen is people would come up and they'd start to say, what are you drawing? And I'd show them, and then they'd start to talk to me. As they start to talk to me, obviously all sorts of issues would arise. One of the problems I'd had with the work I've been doing was some people found it really easy to open out, other people didn't. It was almost as if you needed something as a catalyst to open that story out. So one of the things I decided to do was to devise a set of storytelling cards. I wanted to devise a set that would be a starting point to start in, for getting people to think about the body, first of all. So the process of design was an interesting one. There are so many issues culturally around representation. So the first part of the whole process was actually making a series of drawings that could be simplified. The first images I made were actually far too complex. So I stripped them down until they became as iconic as possible. The other issue was actually about colour. What colour should they be? And in the end, I decided that every card should have two versions. One would almost be a negative of the other. And the types of colours would be colours that I started to generate more to do with their emotional potential rather than any form of representation, which would enable me to get around how do we represent the body in relation to particular groups of people. So it sort of avoided that altogether. It became just purely an emotional development. So what were the outputs? Well, there were three, which I'll show you in a minute. I mean, the first was a set of 52 cards. They were designed and then they were printed. And then they were distributed. But the process of the design was actually quite intriguing because I used a group of people with an umbrella term, life hacks for a limited future. They're a group of older people that get together to discuss issues about what it is to get older and how they can self-support. So as I designed the cards, I passed the initial set to them. They came back and they sort of said, no, you shouldn't use this card. What we need is more of this. Interestingly, one of the main issues that came back was that I didn't have enough cards that dealt with women's problems. So I went back, redesigned. So the other thing that started to happen was when people looked at the cards, because of course they were about medical issues, obviously parts of the body, etc. The stories that were emerging were almost too medical. So I then wrote a second text to go alongside the cards that opened up how you might be able to think about the body. So these were the cards. They were printed. On the back of the pack was a way of perhaps using the cards. So it told you you can lay them out in particular ways. You can approach them almost like tarot cards. You can tell stories by perhaps laying out 3 cards, thinking of them as being your past, another 3 being your present, another 3 being your future. And then you start to weave the stories together. As you can see from the cards, they're quite brightly coloured. They're sometimes parts of the body. Sometimes they're things like, for instance, a drawing of a bacteria, or of course, a virus, because it was what things people were getting worried about in terms of viruses and bacteria. So that was obviously becoming really hot at the moment. But the other problem, you could say, was that although I started with cards, when I started the whole idea, I was trying to work with people in pairs. So one person would deal the cards and the other people would sort of help them tell the story, a bit like a gypsy fortune teller. Well, of course, as we've become more and more isolated, as we've become locked down, the idea of one person sitting with another being able to do this started to become really difficult. So the other issue I had to do was to start to think about whether or not this could be done online. So this is how the cards look. When you deal them in 3s, you get a particular sort of resonance from them. Here you've got lungs, heart, and intestines. There are little circles, little triangles, little marks, which I started to put on them. Because one of the very early feedbacks was that people felt they needed a trigger of some sort. So I put these abstract elements in just to see how people would respond to them. What did they mean? What does a spot mean? What does this triangle mean? Does it indicate that something is going on in a particular way? So I developed various versions of a tarot game. But when the cards were distributed, one of the things I was asking people to do was, okay, this is a possible way of playing a game, but what I'm far more interested in is actually how you would use them. So as the cards have gone out to different organizations, one of the things has been how they've then fed back to me, what they've done with them. Some people have been playing the card game almost like a game of Snap. Others have found that they could develop stories in pairs because they were actually able to physically work with them. But several groups actually just said they really like them almost like small art exhibitions. They just like them as pictures, and they've been organized them in different sorts of ways. So because of the problem of us being locked down, I then thought I need an online version. So tried several ways of approaching this. And in fact, the person that solved the issue for me, I think, is actually in the audience today, because he wanted to see how that was working. So what happens is you can see the little red bar that says shuffle. So you can click on that each time the cards are shuffled. Then you can turn the cards over one at a time. And as you do, you get a little bit of text underneath. The text is designed actually to open out the read. So if you see the text underneath the feet, it says, "Our feet steady us. Standing on your own 2 feet suggests that someone is firmly in control of the situation." we put our best foot forward. We set out on our individual journeys, and we are sometimes on the back foot when we're not prepared. To be footloose and fancy-free means to be happy-go-lucky. So as you can see, each card have a small text like this. So it open out the possibilities of a sort of direction. The project, though, continues. And as I start to get feedback from various people that are playing the cards, I'm pushing the project out in different ways. So this slide here represents an issue that's come through about itching and scratching. One of the people that fed back said one of their biggest problems, that they had a condition that meant that they were constantly scratching and itching, and they wanted to see if I could actually respond to that in a particular way. And a while ago, I'd made a series of ceramic pieces based on the problem of loneliness. They were very small, they fitted into your hand, and you put them in your pocket, and you could squeeze them. And when you looked at them, they were designed in such a way that they wrapped around each other. So they looked like two forms being very friendly with each other. So as I've started to sort of get the feedback from the cards, this has generated another series of work. And I said, these are the very early stages of, on the one hand, trying to design a stained glass window, and then on the other hand, producing a whole series of ceramic objects that are directly about this problem that someone's got of being constantly itchy. The small ones, which are the three to the right, are actually, when they're fired and glazed, will be given to the person that initiated the conversation so that they can hold them in their hand and grasp them very tightly, with the idea being that it takes their mind off their constant need to scratch. So hopefully it gives you an idea of what I've been doing.
Thank you so much, Garry. Thank you very much, Garry. That's been such a wonderful presentation. I've put a link in the chat to the online cards dealing option in case anybody wants to have a go at that. We've had quite a lot of points in the conversation reflecting on other artists' work, such as Tracy Emin from Sarah, and how we can be maybe more conscious about what's going on in our bodies than we might be able to articulate, and also how these cards have been used to start conversations and discussions and reflections. And me and you, Garry, have shared these with quite a few different groups and people, and been surprised by quite how people use them and respond to them, as you said, treating them as an art exhibition in a box, but also to reminisce and to reflect and to use them more representationally, so not necessarily to do with the body or anything else, but just to be responding to the images. And lovely to see other comments like Garance, who's been doing a community project around street art, finding new ways to connect people. I've still got a couple of packs of these cards, so if anybody wants to get in touch, I'm happy to arrange to get them to you. And
if people want to contact me directly, again, I can arrange to send some out. I still have some left.
And great to hear from Becky, who was another of our micro-commissioned artists, to describe how she's used the cards as an inspiration for further work and poetry. So thank you very much to everybody. Reflecting on all of these comments and potential themes that we might have as our discussion goes on. But now it's time to talk to our other speaker today, Nia B, if you're ready.
I'm sorry, Garry, can you please stop sharing your screen? I think it's still on. I think you just have to... Yes, that's great. Thanks, yes. Great. Hi, it was really amazing to have an insight in the artistic processes of Sarah and Garry. My name is Nia B. My pronouns are she and her. I'm an artist based in London. My art practice is situated at the intersections of visual art and performance. I use a wide variety of media for my art projects, including installations, video, soundscapes, text, live image feed, and live performance to explore themes related to ecology, culture, gender, sexuality, social ethics, and collective aspirations. I'm going to disappear from the screen now and share some images with you. So I'll try to share my screen. And here we are. Okay. So my interest in pills, tablets, and capsules artistic media started around 2012. I began collecting them and asking people to give me their expired medicines. That project I had in mind never really materialized as it was envisaged. However, this was an opportunity to have several discussions around health and realize how familiar to many people these little objects are in a positive or negative way. Earlier this year, I went back to this concept, this time using the empty disc of pills to produce my one-to-one performance, which unfortunately later was cancelled due to the pandemic. However, this summer, I came across the open call for Beyond Measure conference, and I felt that the themes of the conference really resonated with me, were extremely timely, urgent, and important, especially at a time when artists and generally the creative practitioners are among the ones severely affected by the economic implications of the pandemic. In my practice, I create meditative spaces of vulnerability, affect, interdependence, and connection with my audiences. How to create this connection and intimacy, though, in the current times of social distancing and self-isolation? How to bridge the distance with the audience when we cannot be in the same space? So I decided to create a mailer project to create a direct communication between the artist and the audience. I thought that receiving something in the post that is not a bill, promotional material, or a package from Amazon is really rare nowadays. Especially in times of electronic communication and social distancing, it is even more important to cross boundaries of isolation and deliver a physical object as a gesture of intimacy and care. So the inspiration for the concept of my project came from the health supplements I take every day. With these supplements, I feel that I invest in my physical health and well-being, although I may often neglect my mental health. The title of the project is borrowed from an article on AN, the Artist Information Company website, which aimed at generating a more open dialogue around mental illnesses and well-being in the arts. Despite there is increasingly more research around the role of the arts in relation to well-being, there is a tendency to romanticize and fetishize the artist's own mental health sufferings. This is a persistent practice in the art world, the media, and even among artists and creatives. So my intention with this project was to continue this conversation through my own social media and creative platforms and build a project which is based on community ownership in health and well-being. I asked artists and creatives to send me texts, poetry, words, ideas, strategies for coping and carrying on when times are difficult. What do we do to support our mental health and personal well-being? Many people responded, and this on its own stimulated already very touching conversations around the issue. I was grateful to see the generosity of the creative community to discuss about how they look after their mental health. Connection with nature, seeing the bigger picture, changing perspective, take time to rest were among the themes of the responses. So then I gathered all the responses I received, as well as my own strategies, and produced a series of short texts as provocations, reminders, and tips to be delivered back to the community. A capsule is a delivery system. It delivers substances into our bodies. We associate this with medicines, vitamins, health supplements, and other health medicines that people see in a positive or a negative way, but nevertheless, it's a very familiar sight. So I use the capsule to deliver the messages that can function as mental health supplements and are to be taken when needed. So these are some images from the capsules that contain the text messages. I also wrote instructions about the supplements, what these are for, how to use, possible side effects. And then I called for participants to register their interest to the project and receive the texts on the post. I'd like here to thank also Leeds Arts Health and Wellbeing Network for helping to spread the work through their newsletter. As part of the commission, the supplements were sent to 42 participants. Those who received the art pieces were encouraged to take photos and post them on social media under the conference and project's hashtags. This way, the project is originated and circulated within the creative community. And these are some of the posts on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. There was a very creative and generous range of responses, and I still keep receiving messages from people who find them helpful. Recently, I was touched by a message from a participant saying that the capsule helped a friend of hers as well. So I'd like to thank the Cultural Institute for commissioning this project, especially the production and the communication team. Please follow the conference on Twitter and check out the rest of the amazing projects on the online exhibition page. If you'd like to keep up to date with the project, please check my website or send me an email. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nia, for such a fantastically focused presentation. I can see for all our artists such a lot of positive and intelligent responses. Is there any particular questions that anybody would like to ask the panel while they're here? Feel free to add things to the chat, or you can ask to speak.
Hi, Geraldine. I've got a question. I can't remember how to do the hand raise thing now. So I just turn myself on. Thanks, everybody, for your brilliant presentations, really insightful, and I think a really good indication of the variety of approaches to this commission that we had. I wasn't really sure. It was Geraldine's idea to commission people to respond to the theme of Beyond Measure, and I thought, I'm not sure what we're going to get, because it seemed to me like an odd thing to respond to, but I think the three people that we've heard from today really demonstrate that we've had such a wide variety of responses, and you'll see as well, if you go onto the gallery, the other 7 commissioned artists, also very varied. I just wanted to pick up on Gary's cards, just an observation really, more than a question, and I've seen a few comments on this in the chat as well, about people wondering about different audiences, different groups that these cards could be used for. And I wondered, Garry, if you design them with a particular audience in mind. You mentioned spending a lot of time working with older people, but I've seen somebody, and I'm sorry I didn't note down your name, but being interested in using the cards working with people with complex needs, for example. And I was wondering also about groups where there are different languages being spoken, and also in schools as well, maybe. So I think Gary's still here, isn't he? Yeah, he is. I can see him on the list.
Yeah,
so I just wondered if you had anything to respond.
The thing that's been interesting has been the feedback from various groups. So obviously, because there are no words involved, that's really useful for some people. The first feedback I got was actually from different ethnic groups that really liked the colour. They really felt that it was a great way of dealing with the body that didn't particularize it. So, they're so used to things being pink or brown, or, that actually having the body is just an emotive container. They found that much more liberating, so you could just deal with it. What I am interested in is actually redesigning again, because the first redesign, as I said, what I started getting was women saying, we need more women's stuff here. So one of the cards is obviously a baby in the womb. Obviously that for a lot of women was really important. The fallopian tube, for instance, that again was driven by somebody looking at the pack, and they'd obviously had problems with fallopian tube. So actually I could see that almost like any group could start to particularize the card pack. You could actually, anybody could feedback and say, we need more of this, or we need more of that. I've had young people, there's a skaters group using them, so that young people often find it quite difficult to talk about their body. It isn't something that you do. So each group almost needs the cards particularizing. One thing I was worried about is the fact that, and then at one point I took them out, then I put them back in, was the fact we got representations of a vulva and a penis. The fact that some groups might find that really difficult. But when I started designing them, I quite early got the feedback that it ought to be there, because those are the issues, those are the parts of the body a lot of people find it really difficult to talk about. So that sort of feedback coming backwards and forwards, I think is quite intriguing at the moment. And in fact, the reason I'm working with this thing about itching is what I hadn't realized when I first designed the cards, they were more about things than processes. And perhaps it's the processes that make you more aware of the problem than the thing. So itching and scratching is much more important than the fact somebody's got eczema. If that made any sense.
Yeah, completely. And I can see that Becky in the chat has just agreed with that as well. Yeah.
Right.
And Garry, we've had a few requests for your packs, so I'll add your email to the chat if that's all right. And then
okay, yeah, that's fine. The main thing is that people need to put their address in. I've had several people email and say, send me a pack, and then they haven't put their address in. So that's really important. Oh, and the other thing is, if you need more than one pack, I have been sending some groups up to 4 packs because of the numbers of people that they've got.
Would it be all right to share your email address in the chat so that people can contact you directly? Or
of course, yeah. I'll put it in.
So we had a question from Philippa to Nia B, and it was asking, have you reflected on the desire for organisations to measure success?
Not really. This is a very honest response. I think I've been overwhelmed by this process and the in a positive way, and the communication with other artists and creatives, creating the project, sending out the mail, receiving feedback. No, not really. I haven't really reflected on this. Yeah, it's a very new project, so I'm still working it out. I'm still seeing, what the extents are, what the results are, what people feedback is. Yeah, it's very fresh.
I think with Philippa's question, she was thinking about the aesthetics of drugs and medicine and treatments, and the idea of possibly a randomized control trial with non-artistic pills versus artistic prescriptions, which sounds like a next step should you want to take it.
Okay, that's interesting.
We've had another question, Nia, from Steve Manthorpe, who was the tech whiz that helped us to put Garry's cards online. Mm-hmm. And he was asking, would you consider putting the strategies and poems online in a randomized way like Garry has?
Yeah, this is a good idea. I thought that Garry's idea also was great. I don't know, I have to think about it, because what I wanted to do with this project is also kind of create an intimacy through people receiving a physical object, because we rarely receive anything physical like nowadays, apart from bills and packages from online shopping and promotional material. So I don't know, for me it's really rare to receive anything at all that is not in these three categories. So yes, I guess that having something like that online is going to be reachable by more people. On the other hand, I think it would be, this kind of notion of intimacy may be lost. So yeah, again, I need to think about it.
Yeah, I think the audience has been saying how different it would be to receive a physical object and to have that intimate connection. I also notice a reflection from Sarah, from Kat, about how the three different projects and activities that we've described have been characterised by a degree of dialogue, kind of toing and froing between participants and practitioners, and she described it as being quite different from receiving health advice and treatments, which had less reciprocity. I noticed George Clark has got a question about the micro-commission process. Just trying to bring that up. He wanted to kind of note that it was great that we could support a larger group in a project than originally intended, and ask the artists about the process, the support that was offered through the Cultural Institute Lawn and the Beyond Measure programme, and what was enabled by the project. So was there more of a sense of being part of a community of artists? So quite a lot of questions there. Is there anybody who can see the chat question who'd like to respond?
Yeah, I can. I've got them up now. Yeah, I think what the process did do was open doors to a much wider set of connections. That you were getting feedback. I mean, for instance, the process of me moving from actually making card packs to putting the process online, I was able to sort of engage with the conversations about that and get some support in thinking what it might be, rather than just being parked on my own as an artist, isolated somewhere. So in fact, I thought it was a really useful process to be able to engage directly with people.
Sarah, Nia, do you have any further comments?
Yeah, it was a great experience, and what I enjoyed was that there were no strict rules. Like you know, sometimes other commissions have possibly too many restrictions. This was very open, and you can see it from the range of the projects that were selected and exhibited. It's a great variety. And then, I don't know, I was a bit, I was quite lucky. I knew one of the other artists who was commissioned. So we even met, we were locals. That was great as well, like feeling part of a creative team.
Yeah, I think to add to that, just the idea of how we all came from such different angles in a way, and I thought that was really interesting, seeing the projects develop as they were, as people were talking about what they were doing and sharing what they were doing.
It was certainly an intention in the decision-making process, was that we had the widest breadth of art forms and perspectives and practices, and hopefully quite distinguishable projects, so each one being noticeably different from the next, so that we had a really broad range of voices and perspectives and ideas and forms. Another question that's come through the chat is actually from Erica, and it was about how many of the artists, including the artists on our panel, made implicit or explicit references to COVID-19 as part of their practice and their work for Beyond Measure. And she wondered if any of the artists could comment on how these commissions allowed them to explore living with COVID-19.
Yeah.
Sarah.
Sorry. What I was going to say is that a lot of the work that I was doing, the face-to-face work, couldn't happen, and so this commission was really a wonderful opportunity to have a really focused reason for making and exploring something, which, yeah, for me was really powerful to have that, and then soon after completing it, some face-to-face work could start up again. So yeah, it was sort of like a reset for me.
For me, it sort of went off in a strange direction. One of the cards is a drawing I did of a representation of the virus. And to do the drawing, I looked at a lot of the very early representations of the virus form, and it slowly changed until it became the one that we're all very used to. And at the time, I'd been asked to write a report on visualization of the virus for a Finnish magazine. And so another side of this was, I obviously haven't shown any of that work here, but I did put an article together which was about all the different visual references, the development of the idea of visualizing the virus had been through. You know, all the way through, obviously, the use of the word corona and the idea of corona being linked to halos and religious imagery. There was a whole series of things that I was working on at the time, which I haven't really shared with anyone else because the magazine article hasn't come out yet.
Yeah, the implications of the restrictions of COVID-19 were so present when I was developing my project, and one of the reasons that the mental health, I believe that, you know, this also situation affects greatly artists and creative practitioners' mental health. Also general in the community. So yeah, this is very present in my project. And also the idea that I need to reach beyond the digital and online communications and reach physically into people especially people who may live on their own and, you know, they don't have much physical interaction. So yeah, definitely this affected my project.
From my perspective, as one of the other artists, my background is mainly in participatory arts, and I wasn't diagnosed definitely because I think I contracted COVID in the early days when they weren't testing, and experienced what's now known as long COVID. So for me, it was in some ways the opposite of what these artists have been doing. I went very introspective, and focused on my problems with breathlessness and trying to connect with nature rather than with human beings, which I really didn't have the energy to do at the time due to my experience, and use breath as a background for that poem.
Thanks so much, everybody, for responding to that quite personal question. Kat Evans had a question for anybody involved in Beyond Measure, but from our perspectives in the field of arts and health research, is there a hierarchy of words, objects, images, or performance? Does anybody have any opinions on that question?
I do have, but it's difficult to put it all into words very quickly. I think there are all sorts of mixed words between health and religion. When I was looking at it earlier, but I'd need to get my head straight to unpick them again. But I did put a lot of stuff like this in that article. I'll send you a copy.
I guess from my perspective, I think looking at the online exhibition, there's some stuff that I feel personally makes more sense online, such as live poetry and some things like theatre and physical movement that maybe a different experience remotely or digitally. So I suppose it depends on the context and the audience and the intention as to, you know, how these things are experienced in research, because different approaches have been found to have different implications in research. For example, music and dementia, or the postnatal periods, or dance and physical well-being and self-esteem. So different forms of health research and different art forms have had different relationships, but that might be the bias of researchers and audiences and funders and commissioners. And I suppose there are multiple hierarchies. It feels like we've maybe got through all of the Q&A now, so thank you so much to everybody for all of the ideas. If there's any questions that I've missed in the extremely dense and rich chat, if anyone wants to repost them now. We had discussed closing the panel at this point and inviting members to join us for more of a networking opportunity, and if there was an interest in breakout rooms to have more conversation, we were looking at setting those up. So if that's something that people are interested in, if you'd like to stay, and if anyone was just staying for the panel discussion, then we can conclude that at this point.
Can I do my my summing up then in that case before